Welcome to EMAC Regional 2021 podcasts. The show is dedicated to present research results of Polish scientists as authors or co-authors of papers presented during the Regional Conference of European Marketing Academy. The regional conferences are aimed to attract researchers interested in marketing issues, in changing and growing markets, and regarding a regional perspective. The project has been supported by the Polish National Agency for Academic Exchange under the program Welcome to Poland. My guest is Dr. Małgorzata Ćwil, author of paper presented during EMAC Regional 2021 conference under the title Eco-Driving Implementation Determinants in Polish Railway Companies. First of all, Małgorzato, thank you so much for agreeing to participate in this project. And I have to say that your paper has strongly intrigued me. Of course, the topic of ecology in the context of transportation is quite trendy, but eco-driving in Polish railway companies sounds very interesting. So where did you get such an idea for research?
First of all, Jolanta, thank you very much for this invitation. It is a pleasure for me that I can tell you about my research, and the idea for the research may be a little bit also about my findings. About the idea, where from the idea came from, actually, as usually in life, I did not plan to conduct this kind of research. But I took part in one of the meetings in Utrecht in the Netherlands with Dutch railway companies because they published a paper 5 years of eco-driving, which was really interesting about how they implemented this in the Netherlands. I was working with a Polish company who are doing similar thing in Poland, and I found out that approach is totally different in two countries. They really concentrate on the social studies, on behavior. And in Poland, there are almost no studies, no social studies in this field, according train drivers, according railway companies in general. So I decided that it will be interesting to conduct a research in psychology, in management regarding railway companies in Poland, to compare the findings, what we have in Poland to what is in other countries. The Netherlands is considered to be one of the best countries as far as railway industry is concerned, actually. So this was the moment that I got this idea to start the research in Poland. And no doubt it is interesting, it is important because of the ecologic aspects, but not only. Actually, the cost of energy in Polish railway companies are really huge. So when we introduce eco-driving, it can have also economic impact on those companies.
Okay, so it's really a great story, I think, behind your topic, a research topic. And what was the main goal of your research presented in the paper? Yeah, because I know that this is not the only paper you produced in this research area, but if you could tell something more about the main goal of this research presented during the conference.
Maybe I will start a little bit with eco-driving itself. So eco-driving is the idea of minimizing the energy that is being used, just like in cars. And while introducing some styles of driving, changing a style of driving, we can reduce the energy that is being used, just like in cars, similar in railway companies. However, the driving styles are a little bit different, but still it's about changing behavior. And I wanted to check, first of all, what are the attitudes of train drivers, what do they know about eco-driving, about driving styles, and how can they actually impact the energy that is being used. And then if railway companies in Poland introduce this kind of initiatives. And lastly, what factors actually influence train drivers' behaviors in this matter, so when eco-driving is concerned.
Okay, so how do you reach out to train drivers? Because, I'm curious what the structure of the sample was and how you contact this kind of people, yeah?
I had this opportunity to cooperate with a Polish company, Red company, that is introducing innovative initiatives in Polish railway companies. And they are introducing eco-driving, but not only. I cooperated with them when introducing gamified application that showed train drivers how much energy they use and so on. And then I decided that I can actually reach railway companies and broaden this research and this topic of eco-driving. And when I started talking with railway companies, actually they got really, really interesting in this kind of research because no one did it in Poland. So it was the first time for them that someone was interested in social research in their companies. So most of the company, eco-driving was just beginning to be introduced in Polish companies when I started the research. So there were actually only 2 companies in Poland that introduced such initiatives. And when I reached them, when I started talking with them, they actually were really interested in this kind of research. They helped me a lot. They said when is the best time to conduct interviews with train drivers, how to reach them, how to talk with them actually. They made it possible for me to take part in some meetings concerning eco-driving, but not only, some trainings for train drivers and so on. So because of the fact that the topic was new in Poland, I think it was easier for me to start this kind of research because people were really interested in the findings that I could get.
Okay, so you probably met the most train drivers in Poland, yeah? So you are a well-connected person here in Poland. But what do you think? I think that the railway transportation in Poland is dominated by men, but it's only my opinion. Is it true or not?
I conducted my research into big railway companies in Poland. There are no women working as train drivers or train driver instructors in those 2 companies. And we are talking about few hundred people. There are no women at all. So yeah, they are dominated by men, but it is also job that is not easy for a woman, because during the interviews, sometimes I asked about it just out of curiosity. It wasn't my research, but I asked why there are no women. This job sounds to be interesting actually, but it's about the character of work. The hours, they are working long hours. The shifts they change every day. They can change every day. Sometimes it's 8 hours, sometimes it's 12, sometimes it's 4 hours. So it really is not easy when you have to combine it with having family, kids, and your husband is working, for example. But there are some other things that are not easy probably for a woman to accept, because if you are working for 8 hours, for example, this is your shift, and sometimes you have no time or there is no toilet anywhere nearby, so in the train stations where you go. So this is also, I would not even think about it, but this could be one of the reasons why actually it's not easy for a woman to start working as a train driver.
I think this is a very interesting story behind behind the sample structure. Yeah. So what research methods did you use in your study? Of course, not only maybe in this paper presented during the conference, but you have already mentioned that you had some interviews, but I don't think so that it's the only one method you have used.
Yeah, so the research itself was really huge, I would say. I'm more a quantitative researcher myself. I graduated quantitative methods. I teach statistics. I use a lot of quantitative research, but I couldn't start with that because it was something completely new, especially in our country. And I found out, like, in my personal opinion, the situation in other countries, for example, the Netherlands, is totally different. Their hierarchy, for example, in railway companies, the culture that they have in their companies is so different to what we have in our country that I couldn't even think about hypotheses for my quantitative research for Polish railway companies. That is the reason why I decided to start with qualitative research, with interviews, just because of the fact that there was no similar research conducted in our country. So I started with qualitative research, with interviews, semi-structured, and only then I conducted the interviews not only with train drivers, but also train driver instructors, but also their managers. So it was really interesting to find out how eco-driving is introduced in Polish companies, but also how the whole structure looks like. What about the problems they are facing? What are the challenges? And what are the successful factors as well when introducing this kind of initiatives? And only then, when I knew more about the project, more about the companies, the style of management, the culture, organizational culture, only then I could think about hypothesis for my quantitative research. So this was the second part of my research. So I used mixed methods, started with qualitative, then quantitative research, and only then I knew what kind of theories I wanted to introduce in my quantitative research. I conducted this part of research using questionnaires. So I gathered data using questionnaires. Also, I used the theory of Isekaizen of plant behavior. So it was social research, but I already knew what I want to study after my qualitative part.
Okay, so how many people you interviewed and how many people took the survey? And the survey was digital? It was a computer-assisted web interview, or maybe paper and pencil interview or something like that?
So I started with interviews. In my interviews, 18 people took part. It's not a big sample, but it was enough for all the research questions that I had for my qualitative part. And I knew that I will have a chance to broaden everything in my quantitative part of the study. And I decided to use the traditional way of conducting the study. Meaning paper and pencil one. Why? Almost 300 train drivers took part in this part of the study, which is quite a lot, I think, for this kind of study. And I'm pretty sure it would be not possible when I used the internet, when I just sent the link to my questionnaire and use this kind of study. The easiest way to do my research, both of the parts, was during the training. Train drivers, every 3 months, they have a few days of training sessions, and they gathered all of them in one building and have the whole day of different training, starting with the training with, for example, some psychological stuff, but also about their driving styles, like everything, some new vehicles that they are going to use, everything. But what was important, all of them were gathered in one building. And it was a perfect opportunity for me to gather the data that I needed. So, of course, I needed the permission to do my research, but they agreed that during the training session, I can do both interviews and also my surveys.
Okay, your research was declarative. To what extent do you think the declared attitudes of train drivers may be reflected in actual behavior?
First of all, I wanted to combine it with actual data from their rides, but then, unfortunately, the research will not be anonymous anymore. And if I wanted to gather as many answers for my questionnaire as it is possible, I knew that it needed to be anonymous. I mean, as many, but also honest ones. Because even during the qualitative part of study, even during the first part, I got the questions, okay, I can tell you that, but don't tell my manager, for example. So I knew that it has to be anonymous. And that is the reason why it was impossible to combine with real data from the rights. But I think that because of the fact that I did not gather any data about themselves, like the surveys were anonymous, I hope because of that I could get the data that I needed. But also at the same time, I gathered some data about the rights. Of course, I couldn't compare it with each of the questionnaires, but in the whole picture, when we take a look at the company, we could see some trends, and they were in line with the data that I collected from the questionnaires.
Okay, have you measured the effect of experience on the attitudes and behavior of train drivers? So, for example, probably you questionnaire drivers who has been in profession for many years, for example, and maybe not so many years. So sometimes they have certain habits, and maybe they don't want to change the behavior. So what is the opinion of yours here? Mm-hmm.
In the interviews, I had also this feeling that there are some people who are working for a lot of years, because actually in train drive companies, you have people who've been working there for 20, 30 years, really a long time. So they have their own behavior patterns and don't want to change it. But then in the quantitative part, actually, this wasn't confirmed. There are some people who are working for a really short term and they don't care about eco-driving, they don't care about ecology, they don't want to change their behavior. And at the same time, there are people who've been working for a really long time, but they are really interested in this kind of initiative. They want to change their behavior, even if it's not really easy for them because they already have their patterns. But it turned out that how many years they work in the company did not really influence their behavior or their willingness to change behavior.
Okay, so I think that the evidence of your results of your research support also the recently busted myth that this is the mainly young people who are concerned about the climate and are interested in ecology. So it's not just a question of age, yeah? So
that is true. That is true. And in my research, it turned out that there is one really crucial issue when it comes to changing your behavior and style of driving. It's not age, but it's how you perceive this kind of initiative as eco-driving. Because if we say about it as an ecologic change, and if you perceive it as ecologic change, then a lot of people really at least try to change their behavior, try to use less energy. But there were some train drivers, actually quite a big group of them, that perceived it more as an economic change. Meaning that if they change the way they drive, it would actually have influence on some saving. So they will actually earn money for their company. It would be not for themselves, it just will be for the company. And those train drivers who perceive this more as economic change, economic initiative, they weren't willing to change their behavior. So I found that it was more about perception of these kind of initiatives. And all in all, we know that it can have actually both results, economic and ecological one. But the perception of train drivers and what is the main reason of introducing such an initiative had a really big impact of how they behaved, whether they changed behavior or not, whether they changed the way of driving.
So if you think you have an impact on reality, yeah, so you are willing to change your behavior.
Yes.
Somehow. Okay. So
ecological impact.
Absolutely. Did anything surprise you in this research?
Yes, there were quite many things that surprised me, actually. Maybe I will start with the first part of the research, so qualitative. I did not know much about train companies, railway companies in Poland, especially how they work from inside. What we see outside is something completely different. And for example, the hierarchy, the communication, the problems that they are facing on everyday basis, I knew nothing about that. And for example, I found out that there are train drivers, the lowest stage of management, these are train drivers, instructors, but they are still perceived by train drivers as part of the team, as they do not perceive them as higher in the hierarchy, let's say. And the communication there is just perfect. But then on the second stage in the hierarchy, you have managers, and there is almost no communication between train driver instructors and train drivers and managers on higher stages of the hierarchy. So it was surprising for me to find it out that there were so many problems with communication, and you could see it when introducing this initiative, but also other ones. And but then talking about eco-driving, what was also surprising for me, because even when we are speaking here, we are saying about ecological aspects. And if we think about eco-driving, even this eco part, it stands for ecological. But it turned out that the majority, around 2/3 of train drivers, perceive it more in economic aspects, not ecological ones. So it was also really surprising for me to find out that, okay, I'm speaking about sustainability, we are speaking about ecological aspects. And for sure, because when using different style of driving, you can reduce energy consumption by around 7 to 12%. It depends on the study, but let's say around 10%, which is quite a lot. And still, the majority perceive thinks only in this economic way, saving money, not doing something good actually for our planet Earth, not doing something good for ecology. So it was also really, really surprising how they perceive this kind of initiative, especially that it was communicated in a way that it's ecological, not economic. So it was really surprising for me.
Or maybe in terms of image of the companies, yeah, I think that the benefit is here ecology, but in terms of internal relations, I think that the people inside are more down to earth, yeah. So it also, I think, first of all, it's business, yeah. So, yeah. But if you hear how they are explaining it in the companies, it's always about ecology. So that's the reason why I was surprised that more people perceive it as the main reason of introducing this kind of initiative was economic. Małgorzata, could you tell me, do you think that your research is universal or only strictly connected to Polish context? What do you think? For example, of course, you have mentioned Netherlands, for example, but that this is absolutely another word, yeah? But maybe your study could be also more universal, for example, in terms of different transportation means. What do you think? Or not?
I was thinking about it, and to be honest, to answer this question, I would have to conduct more research in this topic because I'm not sure. I think that the quantitative part of the research, it can be used in other countries, but also in different kind of transportation means. I mean, if we are thinking about metro, for example, or trams, it is actually similar to trains in some of the ways. It's not the same because, for example, the distance between is totally different, but it could be introduced. And generally, the model that I used in my quantitative study, this is the model of behavior. So I think it can be introduced in some other transportation companies, some different contexts for sure. But my qualitative part of the study was really about Polish railway companies because the context really mattered here. I really wanted to dig into this kind of culture that we have in our country. So I think that those kind of findings that I had after the first part of the study would be really hard to broaden in any other industry or another country. But I'm not sure. Maybe the situation in some other countries, like the organizational culture or hierarchy and everything about it, this is similar in other countries. For sure, not Western Europe, because I can give you an example. In Poland, the groups of train drivers, these are large groups, 60, 80 people, and they have only one train driver instructor. So there is like one manager for 60, 80 people. It's a huge group. In Western Europe, it's up to 20 people usually. So it's a huge difference when you manage 20 or 80 people and you try to introduce some changes in the company. That is the reason why from this organizational point of view, I think that our companies just work in totally different manner. But when the quantitative part of the study was more about behavior of single people, single train drivers. So it was more about individuals. And here, I think that the findings that I got from this part of research could be introduced in different companies, different contexts, different countries.
Okay, so the last question. Do you plan to continue this research topic?
For sure, I plan to publish some more studies about the findings that I got because it's still in the process. Because this is the topic of my PhD actually, which I had the defense 1 month ago. So I just finished the research. And now I'm going to write some papers about it. And I'm not sure if I will continue this one. I think I need some time to think about that. Because there are some areas which could be still broadened, and eco-driving nowadays is introducing more and more railway companies in Poland, which is interesting because this is actually happening on a broader scale and so on. So I'm not saying that I'm finished with the subject, but I need some time to figure out what I want to study in the future. For example, what is interesting and could be studied is the fact that not only train driver behavior influence the energy that is being consumed. There are other factors, like, for example, weather, the temperature that we have, but also the route itself, or the type of the vehicle, or the schedule, and how much time actually we have to go from one station to the other, because it influences the time and that we can use for some eco-driving. And I think it can be studied, but maybe in the future, I will conduct such a study, how much energy actually we can save by changing the behavior and how much energy is consumed because of some other factors.
Okay, thank you very much, Małgorzata, for very interesting and thought-provoking conversation.
Thank you very much, Jolanta.
You were listening to EMAC Regional 2021 podcasts. My guest was Dr. Małgorzata Ćwil, the author of paper under the title Eco-Driving Implementation Determinants in Polish Railway Companies.